Creating a viable future for UK steel industry. I just concatenated it to say saving British steel. And there is a metaphor in this because the name of the company that is now called as Tata Steel UK was at one point of time called British Steel. This is the scheme of the presentation, and what I'm going to present today is what I learned over since 2003, 2004 that I came into contact with Goldratt for the first time, till now, whatever I have learned. I tried to use it because consequences were disastrous otherwise. And that is what is the story I'm going to tell. But before I tell you that story, let me give you a bit of an introduction of where I come from. For 27 years, I have been married to this company, and my wife, I have been working for her only for 23 years. So you can imagine. This group was founded in almost 150 years ago. This year, actually, we are celebrating 150 years of this group. And it is in more than 100 countries. There is a total revenue of more than $100 billion. And in fact, just a couple of weeks ago, Tata Consultancy Services became the first company in India to become a $100 billion market cap company. So it is ranked 11th most reputable and promoter company is Tata Sons, which is 2/3 owned by trusts. And those trusts, every year's revenue, 2/3 of it simply goes into charity. That's what this company, this group is about. And more than 100 million pounds is invested every year in the community kind of projects. Why? Because this man, this old man, who actually conceived this whole project of steel, but also conceived the project of power, of educational institution called, it is called Indian Institute of Sciences today, and Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. All that was created by this guy, conceptualized by this guy in late 19th century. And you can imagine that late 19th century, India was in a very, very different space. This is the man who said in the 19th century that in a free enterprise, the community is not just another stakeholder in business, but is in fact the very purpose of its existence. And that is why when 2/3 of the trust's money goes back to the society, it is because what comes from the society goes back to it many times over. And what is Tata Steel? It was created in 1907. We have manufacturing operations in 26 countries, 74,000 employees, and turnover is around 18 billion, and it is a Fortune 500 company. But this journey has not been an easy journey. In fact, in this journey, there have been many ups and downs, including a point in time when industrial strike threatened in the very early stages of Tata Steel's journey to close down this experiment in India. In fact, Mahatma Gandhi had to send a very dynamic leader called Subhash Chandra Bose to, not have that strike. And since then, in last 85 years, Tata Steel has not seen a strike. It almost became bankrupt in 1992. When India liberalized its economy at that time, with years of lack of investment, etc., and lack of customer focus, this company was so less prepared that it was almost bankrupt in 1992. From that stage, there was a drive to improve costs and become the lowest cost producer of steel in 1999. But that was not enough because in 2002, the steel company became, once again, the steel cycle turned so bad, it was worst in its previous 20 years history, and there were hardly any companies that were making money at that time. In fact, there was none. And we were also in a very bad shape. And that is the time when Mr. Muthuraman was the managing director of the company. And he had asked me at that point in time to come and try and help create a company where we could be perpetually EVA positive. From that journey, my own journey towards discovery began to try and figure out how does the world make improvements? So I came across Six Sigma and TQM and all that. And I tried to create a program called Aspire. And yet I was not sure about a few things. One was, how do you set the goal? And how do you know that you will definitely reach there? And that is when I met Goldratt in a program on viable vision. And he was talking about all this on-time delivery, etc. And I said, what if you can sell everything anytime that you produce? He said, then you're sitting on a gold mine. and I can tell you how to get that gold mine. I got him to meet Mr. Muthuraman, and there was a very interesting dialogue that happened at that point in time, and that dialogue was, Muthuraman drew a cyclical curve of steel industry. And he said, our fortunes fluctuate with the cycle of the steel industry. I want it to be flat and growing. When the downside is there, and Alan uses some of the analogy from anti-fragile, the downside risks are minimal and upside potential is high. That's when you become anti-fragile. We didn't use that term, we didn't know that term. The book was not yet written by Nassim Taleb, but that is what Muthuraman gave Eli the challenge. And Eli said that I thought viable vision was the really top of the thing that a company could aspire for. You have just doubled that aspiration. And then he came up with a good number of people that I know now from here in the TOC community, with whom we started getting connected. And that made the company strong enough that in 2007, we ended up buying Chorus, which was by itself a legacy of two different very big companies. In 1967, the British government combined all the steel companies in Britain and made it into British Steel with 269,000 employees. By the time we acquired, it had amalgamated with Hugavens in Netherlands, and it had only 40,000 employees. And yet, we inherited a pension fund with 130,000 people in it. So we never had these employees, but we had their liabilities. And then the world went upside down after 2007. Eli, at that time itself, had called it a monumental distraction. Well, some distraction it was, because British steel industry, since that time, if you look at the graph on the left-hand corner top, steel costs are mostly in dollar terms, because all raw materials are traded across the world in dollar terms. And the red line over there tells you the pound-dollar relationship, which was weakening of the pound. And the prices in Europe are determined in euro terms. The blue curve over there tells you that the limitation on your prices are by the euro, and the pound started appreciating against euro. The squeeze became like a perfect storm in the moment that we were still not recovering. In the second graph, as you see, after the financial crisis of 2008, the European steel industry had not yet recovered by 2014 to the pre-crisis levels. And there was this red dragon called China, who had been importing steel from all over the world, suddenly started becoming a major exporter. And by the way, information travels faster than steel. Steel doesn't have to travel to any place. If a trader picks up a phone and gets a price, that becomes the benchmark. And therefore, the prices drop. This is the simple reality of steel industry. In the meantime, if you see from 2008, 2009 onwards, that is FY09 means it's March ending 2009, so 9 months of 2008. The top line over there is what happened to Tata Steel India. It was already on Viable Vision project. It had already established, by the way, that vision of Muthuraman that all this fluctuation should not affect this company. You can see that a little bit. And yet, Europe was on a perpetual decline. This is Tata Steel UK, the British Steel portion of it. And within that, there is a long product business that was going downhill as well. And every year, there was this conventional thinking of, if you cut costs, you can't afford it, there's not enough market, you can try to stem the tide. The tide was never stemmed because of the perfect storm that was happening. And in the meantime, Tata Steel India seemed to be escaping it. And even when there were some other types of problems, which were mentioned in another project in Jindal Steel and Power, the same time when all this mining crisis happened in India, mines were taken away, some mines were stopped. All that effect is also there. And despite that, it continued, by the way, on a much lower volume than Europe, that these numbers were much better in terms of profitability. So I want to now tell you the story of, first, what we tried to do with one portion of that business, the long products. So there was, after a series of projects, this last project was called Project ARC. And Project ARC, I'm calling it a traditional non-TOC response to crisis in this long product division of Tata Steel. So what is the first reaction that you would have? If there is not enough demand, try to cut the tail. You try to cut the tail in an attempt to reduce the volume. What happens is that you can potentially lose more throughput than the operating expenses that you have lost. And that is exactly what happened over here. So what do you do next? You try to sell the business. So we started contacting people, but who wants to buy a loss-making business? But there was somebody who said, yeah, I can attempt it. So 1 year of negotiations and month after month deteriorating performance. What happens? The guy walks away. Now what is the choice that you're left with? Because now all your competition is counting your days, PE firms are not interested, so you have some consequences. The board then says, enough is enough, you guys have promised, nothing has happened, let's close it. Close it? Actually, it was in June 2015 that this discussion was taking place. I was not in charge of long products business at that time. I was executive director on the board of Tata Steel Europe and looking after supply chain, etc. And we were discussing in the exco that do we close it pre-Christmas or post-Christmas? And how would we run the company till that time? And I was saying, oh my God, why do you want to do that? Then stop it now. No, we have to be responsible people. We have to close this company in a responsible manner. We can't shortchange the customers, etc. No, but if you think that you can run it for 6 months, then why don't we run it differently? Because failure has consequences. You know, an integrated steel plant is at the nerve center of a socio-economic activity. If you look at the employment, it is not just the 6,000 employees who were there on the rolls of the company. There were tens of thousands of employees who are into secondary employment because even a scaffolding company is a few $1 million company. A company that provides you vehicles in the plant is also a few $1 million company. There are a lot of people who are dependent on you. And even a barber in the township is getting fed by somebody who is being paid either directly or indirectly by an integrated steel plant. That is the nature of the economy there. That is the nature of the history there, that people's skills, etc., have been developed with a focus that eventually our children are going to work in these kind of steel plant or one of its associated companies. The social systems, the politics around that, all that is dependent on that integrated steel plant. The whole raw material supply chain, in order to produce 3.5 million tons of steel, you transport around 10 million tons of raw material. There are logistics companies involved. There are shipping companies involved. There are byproduct supply chain where even if you produce the slag, that goes into cement making industry. You produce gas that goes into power plants. There is finished goods supply chain that is again creating dependencies. And there are services that are all provided. And as I was going for one of the meetings, on my right was the steel plant, and on the left was the city. And I was thinking, oh my God, how can I live with this burden ever? That if this disappears on my right, this becomes a ghost town eventually. And that was the emotion I was carrying, because presiding over the closing of an integrated steel plant is quite a traumatic experience. The problem was this trilemma. We had no time, we had no money, and we had no ideas. In fact, this is what one of the guys I tried to contact, a PE firm who came to see the place in July, and said, not only are you losing money, you don't have a management team that has any credible plans to ever make money. Why should anybody buy this company? In fact, I met Cyrus Mistry, who was the chairman at that point in time, and I said, I want to do something. I said, but I don't have time. Board has already taken the decision. I said, even if do you understand the consequences that are there? He said, genuinely, I would want to help, but I don't know what to do because the board has decided. And I said, but even if you want to close it, it'll take 6 months. He said, Bimal, do what you can, I'll support you, but I don't have time. He couldn't even guarantee me 6 months. There was another person the then CEO of Tata Steel Europe, to whom I had given this challenge, we are perfectly fitting the definition of Einstein's definition of madness, that you continue to do the same things over and over again and expect different results every time. Next 6 months, what are you going to expect? Nothing different. So can we do it differently? And his question was that what would you do differently that has not been done or thought before? Because this is not the first cycle of improvement that we are doing. This is one of the last cycles of improvement that we have just been through with the Project ARC. That was the challenge. So my only fallback option was the fundamentals of TOC, not even a solution or a specific application, because none of the applications told me what to do. But there are a few things that I had learned in TOC, and the number one thing that I had learned was ambitious goals eliminate choices. That means they create focus. Second thing that I had learned was that complexity kills. Why? Because it wastes time and resources. But far more importantly, it obscures any improvement that you want to make and see its effect. Because in the chain where it is lost, you don't know. And one thing that is definitely there about complexities is that dependency creates complexity, and therefore eliminating dependencies reduces complexity. That's why buffers work, right? So going to the general theory rather than the specific applications, these are the insights. But another insight I had was that systems approach creates win-win-win. By the way, I have not used win-win because win-win-win is the correct terminology, okay? Which is, the corollary is that if lose-lose-lose is visible, that means systems approach is missing from our thinking. It was a long shot towards that conclusion, but I thought that it is the right conclusion. If society is going to lose, if the company's shareholder is going to lose reputation, if they're going to lose money and everybody, all the suppliers are losing, everybody is losing, obviously systems thinking is missing. Now, to start with, you can start with an ambitious goal because that takes care of bullet point number one. But how do you get the commitment? That's also a journey I would want to share with you. So reducing complexity, let's deal with that. So functional organization creates dependencies, which creates complexity in decision making, but does not create alignment of hearts and minds. Alignment of hearts and minds gets created when people's futures are linked to their day-to-day activities. You ask a question that what is it that an independent owner will not pay for things? Now, as part of a bigger system, you pay for a lot of complexity. That is the casino cost that you pay. But the boutique shop does not have to pay for the casino cost, and it had a specific number. It was 22 million pounds. That was our cost of complexity. Direct cost. There were many indirect costs. Now, second realization was that if complexity is proportionate to dependency, then longest dependent supply chain with moving bottleneck would be the most complex one, product line. If such a product line is also the most loss-making, then attempting to improve it in a race against time would be waste of management bandwidth. Remember, we have been talking about what is one thing that is most scarce is management attention. And if we are going to waste management attention on trying to fix something which is most complex to fix, then you are not going to give attention to things that you can fix. I realized that plates business had the highest WIP, the longest lead time, the longest set of dependent events, with completely mismatched batching requirements vis-a-vis demand. So I decided to close plates business. Was I the first one to come up with that realization? The answer is no. So why didn't we do it before? Because there was another piece that was missing, systems thinking. Let me show you what that systems thinking was. And please do not take this process flow as the true process flow of the company, because if you try to make steel like this, you cannot make it with coke. It is only to show those elements of the linkages which are essential to the story. So we have coke ovens, which were in a bad condition, and we were constantly putting money into them for repairs. Now this coke goes into the blast furnace, which also gets iron ore, produces hot metal, which then goes into the steel plant, produces varieties of steel that goes into some form of casting, either in the form of a slab or in blooms and billets. All this goes through reheating furnaces. The gas that comes out of coke ovens goes into the reheating furnaces, or you buy, if you don't have enough of it because you're sending it to the power plant or something, then you buy it from outside. Now, if you look at another aspect, the variable cost of production, we were here at around 3.2 million tons. And the variable cost of production rises after a certain point if you do not have some constraining things, for example, oxygen or some other raw materials which are more expensive in order to get high productivity, for example, pellets, which have got a 50 pound per ton premium. Those are the kind of things that suddenly make the variable costs rise. Some people somewhere running simulation models, etc., would realize, but it is not a common knowledge probably, that how much can be the accelerated nature of variable costs in this kind of a system. Now, our problem is that if you're running 2 blast furnaces and then you try to reduce production, if you reduce production too much, you can't run the 2 blast furnaces. Then you will have to stop one of the blast furnaces. Once you stop that blast furnace, all the good orders with that will also stop. That is the reason that we were not able to do it. Why? Because this would have meant 0.6 million tons going out from the plates business. 0.6, when you take it out from 3.2, would take you back to a very high cost curve over there at 2.6 level. So we had to come up with an idea that even if we are not making money on 0.2 million tons, it still gets us to this zone of tranquility at 2.8 to 3 million tons. In that region, if we are able to operate, then we have a chance that we can reduce, we can go to the lowest cost on this one, and we can still, without making money on that 0.2 million, we can make money on the rest of the 2.6 million. That was the insight. That was the systems approach thinking over there. And in that one, we also realized that because now you are operating the blast furnaces at lower capacity, you can use cheaper raw materials, so this curve can become even better. So we decided that. And another insight, looking at the global steel industry, which one is the first unit in an integrated steel plant that goes into production? It is a coke oven. Which one is the last one that goes out of production? It is a coke oven. Either you continuously operate, you can't start and stop a coke oven. You have to run it for the full life, and then you stop. What is the inevitable conclusion out of this? That if the world is moving up and down in steel production, and world typically operates at around 72 to 78% steel versus capacity, inevitable conclusion is that there will be coke surplus available. Also, if coke economics works better with gas, and gas is not working in our favor, then in that case, I can simply buy coke and live with it. So I decided to close one of the coke ovens. Now, I don't want you to make you a metallurgical expert out of it, but I just want to expose you to the systems thinking that was required behind it. What happened as a result? These are just 2 examples, and both plate exit and coke ovens gave me 45 million pounds. Remember, 22 million pounds already came from decomplexing. And there were some other ideas, and I don't have so much of time to describe each one of them. But I want to just focus your attention on the line at the bottom from Mark Meuhaas, a person who became a very good friend of mine eventually. And he is the one who said, I see roughly 300 plants every year, because he is buying companies in distress. In 5 years, I've seen 1,500 plants. And I can tell you that this is the most credible I have ever seen. And this happened by November, because on 3rd of August 2015, we hived down this business. On 20th of October 2015, we took these decisions and made public announcements. He came back in November. He saw the whole thing. He said, this is incredible. This is not the same company. And this was his statement. But alignment, commitment requires many, many stakeholders to be dealt with. You have, of course, the government to lobby with. And government in crisis often tries to act. Although the default mode sometimes is without getting blame and without putting any money, if you can avoid blame, that is the best status quo. Because there are too many demands from too many industries. So leave them alone. But in times of crisis, often you get some moral support at least. Suppliers. Now, I went to the suppliers, and my first reaction was, why don't everybody take a 10% cut? And my colleagues told me at that point in time, what are you talking about? Many of them don't make that kind of a margin. I said, how many of our customers have asked us that question? Because we wouldn't be in this position. So why don't we ask that question and let them do the innovation? And I had a supplier conference like this, and I said, you know what? I cannot guarantee that if you participate, then we will succeed. I can only guarantee if you don't, then we'll fail. So I don't have a magic bullet. It takes every stakeholder to participate in order to succeed, but if one stakeholder participates, that's not a guarantee for success. I also told them that I understand that if you do not want to stay with us because you do not believe in our future, and therefore you want to take your protective measures, you're free to go. But I want your commitment for 10% reduction now. Because if we have a future, we can think about things that we can do together. Otherwise, if we are dead, we can keep talking to each other's lawyers. Other than a couple of suppliers, everybody else stayed in the game. And I got anywhere between 10 to 18% reduction from everybody. This is the power of that communication. Well, when you tell the problem in a very, very clear manner. There was a more interesting communication with the employees, because I said, how about us having a skin in the game? Let's take a 10% cut in our salaries. Now, that is where I would say that the innovativeness of the unions is great, because they said, don't ask for a 10% cut in the salary. We'll give you you want 10%, we'll give you that. So let's do one thing. Pension is not something that goes into our pocket immediately, but it goes out of the pocket of the company. So we will take company's contribution to a statutory minimum, which has to be at a level which is same as our contribution. So at that point in time, it was 3%. So from 11%, they came down to 3%. And then they took another 3% salary cut for a period of time till the company was in a better position. I got my 10%. This is how each and every member, and by the time the board started believing in this and started being more supportive and giving more time. So this honest, transparent, timely, and frequent communications, that really helped, because we started telling everybody what to do and why it needs to be done. There was a good execution and governance, and I'm just leaving this slide for you for reading later on. But there was a weekly cadence. There is something similar in every story that I hear, that unless and until you have a very tight cadence about measuring what you're doing, checking with people, checking what resources they are getting stuck against, all that is important. And we did all that. We also realigned the organization, because everybody in a functional organization, all P&L responsibility only resides at the top. So we divided it in a manner that people could take responsibility, CEO-like responsibility downwards. And that started giving them options for making choices. This also created the platform for a future throughput-based decision-making in the organization. And what happened as a result was that Tata Steel completed the sale to Greybull, saving the jobs and reviving British Steel. This is from The Guardian. But very interestingly, I want to give credit to a person called Kaushik Vedpatak, who was my chief transformation officer. A person who got, without getting to know the TOC community, he was under my direct tutelage, and he understood completely how to do these things, and he set up the whole system. That system of review, etc., he is the one who set up. But I didn't want to simply, he also wanted to come back to Tata Steel, but I didn't want to leave that organization just like that. It was very important that with the new owners, that thinking is embedded for next 6 months. So he stayed around for 7 months, and then it was that he came back. And that year, this company reported a profit of more than 50 million pounds. This didn't go unrecognized. This is a letter from Nathaniel Mehas, brother of Mark Mehas from Greybull Capital, another partner. He said that when they write the book on British Steel, they will need to dedicate a whole chapter to your personal contribution. And if they even do that, it still won't reflect adequately the role you played. I want to emphasize, who is this you? Because this you is not me. This you is actually the TOC community led by this man, who had told me when he came on 1st of May 2005 to Jamshedpur, he actually wrote it in the visitor's book, that when you see the deeds of the great men, you realize the importance of goal in life, and a goal is nothing but a dream taken seriously. It is that inspiration that has acted. So it is not that statement from Nathaniel Mehas or anybody else who sees it in me, because practically what I am today or what my company is today, I can say with a lot of conviction that it is the TOC practice that has really got us where we are. And because it matches with the ethos of Tata Group, it is a perfect fit for creating win-win-win. But this is a complex supply chain where even as we were trying to solve the long products business, the ground was sinking from under our feet for the rest of the business. This complexity we could remove by taking out long products. Again, another independent supply chain of specialty steel we also divested a year later. But you look at the strip business, it is so embedded. The top portion is Port Talbot-based supply chain, and the bottom portion is a modern-based supply chain. But both of them are in the same markets, completely embedded. And if you look at it, that even if you remove that, that complexity does not reduce. And it is a V plant. We had to deal with this in an environment where we were losing £1 million a day. So on 29th of March 2016, even as we were just negotiating the last bits with Greybull for sale of long products, the board of Tata Steel Limited said, enough is enough. What do you do then? You start a new journey. We started a new journey called Delivering Our Future. Within a year, from roughly minus 200 pounds of loss, we swung back to about 100 million pounds. 300 million pounds swing in a year. But all of it was not our work. We realized that during that time, the market had moved. There were tailwinds in the market. So how do you create a burning platform when people think that, oh, we were in crisis, now we are okay, we are in the green? This is when we created this chart to tell the people how much we are not in green. So we took out the tailwind effect, and we were still below zero on the all-weather condition. So we defined it as an all-weather result. And we therefore said, if the conditions of 2015-16 were to arrive again, are we ready for that? And if we are not, how much would it be necessary to be ready? And we defined that number over here. Once you define that number, then your idea bucket has to be big enough that 1/3 of it you take as a buffer or delivery discount. And then you say, how much is the idea bucket that you need? And we realized, coincidentally, it was as if from £1 million loss a day, we needed 366 million pounds, which is for a leap year, £1 million a day of improvement. Currently, we do have some work going on in that direction. But look at this journey for the retained business, how the financial crisis took us down, a bit of a breather up, and since then we were down till this point, and then we have been for a couple of years here. We can't be satisfied there, because if I check on an all-weather basis, then it is this green curve. Characteristics, it's plateauing. Meaning, we need to focus on throughput. Meaning, somebody needs to help. Alan, why don't you help?
Firstly, it's been an incredible privilege to be part of this incredibly exciting but challenging journey. I met with Bimlendra. We've been friends for many years, and whenever we had complexities, we used to exchange calls. And he called me in around the end of 2016, and he took me through this whole journey. And he said to me, I have a major challenge. We need to find this next big step change. We've tried to kill all the complexity that there is, and at the same time, we've got a major issue with some of the changes that need to be made. It's very counterintuitive, and we're going to get resistance. And that's obvious, because you can't expect people to support changes for which they have no intuition to judge what the likely impact will be. I think when it comes to complexity, ignorance is bliss. Absolute bliss. When you think about the complexity of these systems and how sensitive they are to starting conditions, it's no wonder that people are terrified to make changes. So the first thing that we agreed upon is we needed to find out what are the complexities that could be avoided. Where could the system be further decoupled? And then provide some kind of decision support to the management team to allow them to better predict the impact of these changes, because it was an ambitious plan, and Bimlendra and his team needed to be absolutely confident that whatever they were proposing would have the impact. We ended up building 4 simulation models as part of this journey. And just to give a brief insight about the generic business challenge here, I'm sure you'll agree with me that management at all levels are responsible for 3 things. They must make reliable commitments to customers, to shareholders, to internal customers, to suppliers. At the same time, they must judge the impact of changes. But they're also responsible to ensure the rules that they use to manage their part of the system is what's best for the system, not just the subsystem. And those rules to optimize systems are often very counterintuitive from the local perspective. In fact, if you can figure out the rules to optimize systems, there is no better competitive advantage. So what makes this challenging is that organizations today faces more and more of VUCA. It's a great acronym for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, constraints, ambiguity. The complexity part is the interdependencies that Bimlendra mentioned. And in such systems, they are nonlinear by nature. So what does that mean? It means that small changes can have big impacts, both positive and negative. Now, people are scared of making changes. So if big changes can have big impacts, positive or negative, then what would they do? They would be okay to make small changes. But what if small changes could have big impacts? They would be absolutely terrified to make even small changes. And that's what we were noticing on this management team, is the inertia was coming from the fear that I can no longer predict what will happen if I make changes. So why are current tools inadequate? There are certain problems that can be solved by algorithms. There are other problems that can only be solved by heuristics. And then there's a separate type of problem that can only be solved by simulation. The only way to predict what will happen is to build a model that's representative, press the play button, and see what will happen. And many of the decisions, many of the problems that management face today are of that nature, that the only technology that can help them is simulation models. So why simulation? It can allow you to capture all the critical interdependencies. It can provide you with the ability to predict a range of outcomes. If you think we ask people to create a budget, based on what? There's a distribution of possible outcomes, and yet we ask them for one number. We have no idea where in the range of numbers they give us their estimate, and then we add them up, and we're surprised that it doesn't turn out the way that we want. So simulation also, very importantly, creates a safe-to-fail environment. It allows you to do low-cost, low-risk, very fast experiments to see what works and what doesn't work. So specific project challenges, there's, as Bimlendra mentioned, huge pressure on improving profitability and service levels. Many of the past investments and improvements where they were very confident that it would work didn't give the expected results. And there was a lot of focus on asset utilization, on cost reduction, debottlenecking for very good reasons. But it created a balanced system. And a balanced system is unstable. And that's something that I think as a touristic community we should pay a little bit more attention to. A good example is, think about a pencil that I'm holding up. And I remove my finger and it drops. What caused it to drop?
Your finger.
The only right answer is because it was unstable. There is no linear bottom-up causes for it. And that's what happens when you have unstable systems, because you've got balanced capacities. The cause is the instability. It's because it's balanced. So what we wanted to do was to create simulation models that's accurate enough to represent this reality. And even we've built a lot of models, lots of complex models. Even I was skeptical that this was possible. We wanted to use it to check the impact of changes, not just operationally, but also financially. So we had to build in all the financial elements into these models. We wanted to test many of these counterintuitive elements, including, will these TOC rules of switching to MTA and MTO and MTF, will it actually deliver the benefits? And lastly, make sure that these rules could be implemented in SAP and that we leave behind a decision support tool that people can use, not just for once-off decision, but for ongoing ones. And I think most of you have seen this curve of what happens when you get close to maximum utilization of any resource. You have this exponential growth in Q, in the lead time, and an exponential decay in the reliability. But what also happens is your throughput starts growing, then it plateaus, and then it drops when you go into chaos. And you now have a vicious cycle that's really difficult to escape from. You have overproduction to keep things busy, and as a result, you can't make reliable commitments. It's theoretically impossible, not just practically. So you overcommit. You say we can do 3.5 with actually you can only do 3.2. And you can't get out of the cycle. Because as you undercommit, you feel pressure to start even more things, making the system even more unstable. So what's the solution? We know the solution, but the solution is very counterintuitive. We are asking people, if you look at Little's law, there's a good approximation of what the dynamics is. It says throughput is WIP over lead time. What will happen if I reduce WIP? People are terrified because mathematically, if I reduce WIP, throughput will go down. That is true if I'm in the stable part. If you can see there, if you reduce WIP, throughput will go down. But if I'm in the scale zone, by reducing WIP, my lead time will drop disproportionately. I get an asymmetrical benefit in my favor, and as a result, throughput has to go up. But now you're asking people when they're already overcommitting to reduce WIP. It's terrifying. And that's the answer that the simulation model could offer that Bimlendra was asking for help. So first objective was to stop all forms of overproduction, make sure that we can decouple the system wherever possible, make sure we don't have congestion, and we found massive congestion in the system. And when you have congestion and the bottleneck is upstream, you lose capacity and it's gone forever. And then you want to stop overcommitting. You need to provide people with mechanisms to make reliable commitments, not just to shareholders, but also to customers. So the business case for these business models was very clear. We wanted to understand why profitability has been low, why lead time's been long, throughput been lower than expectation. We wanted to use it to test global optima algorithms that's often very counterintuitive. And we wanted to use it as a way of quantifying the benefits. And we got tremendous insights from these models. We immediately discovered something about the past congestion, that they had an incredibly complex matrix that they were using at the time of sale. A customer phones in, and they have to tell them which manufacturing routing to use and which distribution routing to use. So this matrix showed them all the possible ways of making this coil of steel and all the possible ways of distributing it. What they didn't realize is when they built these matrices, it was prioritizing automatically on the lowest cost manufacturing and distribution routing. So systemically, it was causing a bias, and that was causing the congestion. We found many cases that was counterintuitive. Buying the lowest cost wagons would give you the highest total cost. I think a key one, just as an example, I want to end off with, and then I'll show you quickly what the models look like, and we'll ask Bimlendra to just finish up, is an industry paradigm around running large batches, because every time you make a change, it's going to cost you a ton dish, which is about $5,000. So they were running typically between 6 to 11 heats as the minimum. This is what the financial situation looks like when you have a batch of 6 to 11. And that's what your profitability looks like, and your cost per unit, which is about $407. And we could use a simulation model to show what would happen if we completely ignored it. If we needed only one to switch over to not selling whatever you've produced, but only producing what you've sold, look what happens to your cost per ton. Actually goes down. And that's completely counterintuitive. And not only that, the number of hot connects that you can do, which means that you don't have to cool it down and then heat it up, which costs another lot, actually will go up. So this model is going to run just a little bit to show you the kind of complexity of what it takes to create an accurate model of a whole supply chain. We had an Excel spreadsheet that was about 70 sheets long that was reading in data from the plant in order to accurately model. So it's self-configuring the full supply chain based on data that exists in the existing IT systems. From this, we could test any key question. We could see why congestion was happening. We could see why we were losing throughput. We could zoom into specific parts. We had another model for the hot coil finishing. We wanted to see the congestion there. Why was it filling up with coils? And there, the 3D animation is absolutely critical, because you can see what happens when a crane suddenly is delayed because it has to go 3 levels deep to find the coil that it's looking for, and suddenly your cycle times are just so long that it suddenly becomes a bottleneck. You've got congestion, it backs up, and your real bottleneck starts losing throughput. So all of these models were created to provide the management team with decision support to test every single rule that they were considering to change or the investment that they were making. And we had incredible insights. The tough challenge with these is to think as Bimlendra does from a systems perspective, to even know what questions to ask. And the last model here is we were able to read in scenarios, so compare multiple scenarios at the same time, run them with exactly the same parameters, and see, for example, which one would give the best outcome. So I'll hand back to Bimlendra now to just close it off with a vision of the future.
This is the actual drawing from a conference we called it Delivering Our Future conference that we did in a race course with roughly 200 people gathering together, and somebody, an artist, actually recording as we were speaking and doing our various things, putting things over there. And what I want to tell you was that £1 million a day target, that was onerous at this point in time. 366 million was required. As on date, we have £303 million worth of ideas. And every day in the evening, I get a report how much our idea bucket has improved, which projects are running behind schedule, which projects are running ahead of schedule, and this is a daily report. It's not weekly or anything. Weekly, we have a review, but daily is a reporting. And in this one, if you recognize this person is like a Winston Churchill, but it is me. Because I used war rooms, so this person identified that. There is ambitious goal setting, which reduces the choices and creates greater focus. There is this question of trust, which comes on foot, but disappears on a horse. And therefore, we have to keep our stakeholders engaged. Failure is not an option here, because any month that we fail, people lose confidence. That is the kind of a situation we are in. There is a commitment question, whether you are a hen or a pig. And that is what we have really asked people for, that are you a hen or a pig? Are you involved as in an omelette, or are you a hamburger where pig is committed? That is what is our story. Thank you very much for the TOC community.